Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to my Resident Evil 7 review. And if any point in this review you actually agree with one of my opinions, please hit that like button. Alright, let's get into it. So the first thing I gotta say is that Resident Evil 7 finally returns to its roots of true survival horror, and it does so exceptionally. Well, okay, that's it then. Review over. 10 out of 10. TOG. No, that's not all. There's more to this fucking review. So let's actually begin with the first aspect anyone will experience in the game, the story and visual presentations. I would talk about the story first, but god, those animations are just so creepy looking. Like, she looks fine, but it looks like she's talking like, close your teeth or open them properly or something. Anyway, aside from the attempt at creating bilingual mouth animations, you get contacted by this chick you just saw after she's been missing for 3 years. It's suggested that she tells you where she is, and then you travel to the location, which is a dump of a mansion in the swamps. Then you meet the long-lost relatives of Leatherface, and they'll serve as the main antagonists, along with their other goopy-housed guests. So basically, you just go around the game looking for your girlfriend and trying to survive the horrors, all whilst helping out another ally who was also trapped on the property. The player will also uncover more of the game's story through scattered clues, dialogue, and VHS tapes. Now let's talk briefly about the writing in Resident Evil 7. And if you're not familiar with the Resident Evil series, the writing has always had a B-movie campy quality to it, and Resident Evil 7 is no exception to that. So if you're expecting this Resident Evil to be a straight-edge, serious horror game, it's not gonna be a game for you, as, like I said, the writing quality is still that cheesy B-movie campy quality to it, so I'm just preparing you for that. It's not gonna help or hurt the review in any way, as it's just something the series is known for. Overall, the story concept is simple with a decent setup, and it becomes more intriguing as the game progresses. Moving on, we'll get to the... Come on, finish loading already! Well, that's the first real bitch about Resident Evil 7. On the console version, the initial startup loading time is so freaking long. Like, it's longer than any ReCore loading screen, and there's actually a reason for that. Resident Evil 7 begins each play session by loading up the entire property of the mansion. Therefore, there are no loading screens during the progression of the game unless you die or pause and reset. At that point, the game takes a reasonable time to load, but it's only reasonable if there was no long-ass initial load time. And the point I'm trying to make it here is, I really wish the load times, at least after a reset or a death, were a bit shorter. Now we finally get to see what the game looks like, and the graphics are surprisingly dated, with many blurry textures outside the player view. And what I mean by that is, weapon models and other things that the player is holding look fine. Clearly, Capcom was focusing much more of the effort on VR development, rather than making sure the graphics were of the current generation. Fortunately, the overall atmosphere and design of Resident Evil 7 is not affected by the graphics and visual presentation. Also, let's not forget the change in perspective to a first-person view, and I think that was a great decision made by Capcom. Well, I mean, they had to do it for VR, but still, it adds to it even if you don't use VR. You know, Resident Evil 7 made me realize something. The whole derelict house horror trope, it won't ever get old. Just the thought that the house could fall apart on you at any point adds to the suspense. That aside, the atmosphere in Resident Evil 7 is perfect, simple as that. The sound design, music, the mansion, and the surrounding area resonate together in a perfect harmony of horror. The atmosphere and the true survival horror gameplay, as I said before, bring Resident Evil back to where it belongs. Now, while playing this game, I was reminded very much so of Alien Isolation. It also made me realize how similar Alien Isolation was to the original Resident Evil games. For example, at times the main enemies won't always die from conventional means, and should just be avoided at that point. There are, however, some weaker enemies that will die with any weapon, and those are the goopy guys. I really have to praise this approach, as the game will give you a small sense of power until it just rips it all away, making you feel powerless. It also adds to keep the tension of the game at a constant. You'll never know what's coming next, and if you're gonna be able to fight it, or just have to run like hell. Resident Evil 7 also gives the player an abundance of supplies to scavenge for that scatter all around the estate to combine into other items needed to survive. Unlike in the old Resident Evil games, Capcom has introduced the Chem Fluid, and this item allows the player to craft various items such as health with herbs or handgun bullets with gunpowder. Somehow pouring chemicals on gunpowder magically forms the lead and shell casings for the bullets too. Don't question it, I have to give great kudos to this aspect as it gives the player a choice depending on their level of confidence. Do you suck at shooting? Craft a crap ton of heals. If you're good at shooting, well, craft the arsenal of ammo. You'll gain one thing, but unfortunately lose out on the other. You can also use a separation agent to reverse a combination, but those are very rare, so make your choices wisely. I do, however, have a slight problem with being able to just reset the save if you didn't like a choice you made in crafting. It makes the separation agent kinda useless, but then you have to wait through a long loading screen, so it's definitely punished if you do that. In addition to that, I didn't actually mind having to backtrack after getting a new key every time. The sense of mystery only excited me to see what hid behind those locked doors. I did, however, hate having a full inventory and then having to go back to a storage box, throw items in there to clear space, and go all the way back to get the rest of those items. To remedy this, I did find a few backpacks to increase inventory space, but then I ended up looking like this. Yeah, good luck surviving at Leatherface's aunt and uncle's house. Seriously, even with the backpacks you could still run out of space. Yes, I know that's just inventory management in a survival horror game. That's fine. Just drop something you don't need and pick it back up later. Well, you can't do that in this game. That's the one terribly dated aspect taken from early Resident Evil games that should not have been in this one. Once you discard an item from your inventory, you cannot recover it. That is by far the worst aspect about this game. Also, you can only discard consumables, which it doesn't matter as you're not gonna want to discard anything anyway. Unfortunately, this takes some of the needed realism away and consequently ruins a bit of the immersion. On a more positive note, I do appreciate the minimalistic HUD, but I think Capcom could have tried out a few more techniques to completely eradicate the HUD. That would have definitely added to the atmosphere. Moving on, Resident Evil does use many other good aspects from the true survival Resident Evil games, such as looping shortcuts, various traps, novelty save system, teleporting item storage boxes, and simple yet very satisfying puzzle mechanics. More specifically, I felt that all the puzzles were really well done, as anyone with a quarter of a brain could figure them out. For example, there was a part where I read a note that had some cryptic message on it. Then when I turned around in that same room, it took me just a minute and then it all made sense. I also got a very satisfying feeling after I completed said puzzle. A while back when I first played the Midnight Hour demo, that was an issue that me and many others were worried about. Very cryptic puzzle solving. You know, what with the mannequin finger pointing and all that murder solving? Capcom has managed to do a fantastic job in creating very cohesive puzzles in Resident Evil 7. Going back a bit, I do like that some of the enemies couldn't be killed permanently right out, and there were some times the player needed to avoid them. Come to think of it, that reminds me of Lisa Trevor from the remake of the original. I wonder if that's any relation to this new virus. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is I really wish the developers put more of a focus on the hide and seek mechanics. Instead of just crouching behind a corner or a door, I would have really enjoyed to be able to peek around corners, you know, hide under desks and closets, etc. I honestly felt like there were some missed opportunities to polish the hide and seek portions a bit more. Speaking of puzzles and hiding, in addition to the VHS tapes giving the player more insight on the story, more gameplay for these mechanics was also presented. Alright, let's just take a second to discuss what's wrong with these VHS tapes. For one, who the hell still records on VHS tapes? Also, can you even see the person holding the huge VHS camera? No, wait, I know what it is. I've only heard of these, but they lasted less time than the Laserdisc, so that's why you probably haven't heard of them. The VHS GoPro, right here. Yeah, and the characters wore it around their chest like shown. Or maybe it's an alternate history where VHS stayed the superior medium. Wow, wacky game theory. Move over, MatPat. There's a new game theorist in town. Now for a few last minute notes. The overall length of Resident Evil 7 did concern me after knowing that people have sped run it in under 2 hours. That's of course because they knew exactly what to do and they didn't need any of the clues to solve portions of the game. Right now, after a week of having the game, I'm still about 14 hours into it, and of course I haven't completed it yet. I feel as though if you have a VR device, The replayability will be much higher as you'll want to experience it in VR, but you'll puss out until you've at least beaten it once without VR. Also, if you're a completionist, there will be plenty enough for you in Resident Evil 7, as after beating it once, a new difficulty mode called Madhouse is unlocked. There is also a season pass with new DLC already available, which, why? If it's this soon, why can't it just be in the game? Well, that's not the developer's fault, you blame the publisher for that. Oh, but wait, it's the same company. Well, fuck you, Capcom. Anyway, secondly, and this is very subtle, but I really love the door opening animations. Opening them just a crack and then having to do it the rest of the way adds to the suspense of what lurks behind each one. Lastly, I also appreciate the uniqueness and variety of the enemies and bosses. I mean, they're not too original to the series itself, but they do feel very much Resident Evil-like. As stated in the beginning, Resident Evil 7 has returned gloriously to the roots of survival horror that was pioneered by the original trilogy. It does suffer from quite a few issues, however, but I can see a truly phenomenal sequel on the horizon. Resident Evil 7 is not an amazing horror game, but it is a must-have VR game. Here's the thing, it's actually a full-fledged AAA title VR game. It's not a freaking demo or a walkthrough experience. Maybe it's not the first full VR game, but it's definitely a first best. Fortunately, those who lack the VR devices, Resident Evil 7 is still a great horror experience, worth the time for any fan of the genre. Great effort, Capcom. I absolutely can't wait to see what you have in store for a sequel. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard earns a modest 3.5 out of 5. I know it seems a bit low, but there are some definite issues in an overall very good horror game. Alrighty, that's it for the review. If you want to rip my throat out because I was a little too critical, please feel free to do so in the comments. If you have anything else to say, did you enjoy the game, did you not like it, is it meh, just leave your comments below. And as for the rating, it's just the two things that really hurt this game was, for one, the graphics being so dated. I know they had to focus on VR, and so they had their own graphical limitations when, working in VR, but it's still, the graphics are still the way they are, and they should have been way better. And of course, the second aspect is dropping an item and it being wiped from existence. There's no excuse that a game like, for example, Dead Space, 9-year-old game, allowed you to drop an item and come back later and retrieve it, and a game that's not even 1 year old can't do that. I know the original Resident Evil did that as well, wiped from existence, but it's because the game had limitations, and I understand that. The game has far less limitations now, so there really is no excuse for being able to drop a night and pick it back up, and those two things that really hurt the review. So I'm sorry if that bothered you, because those two things actually bothered me a lot. And yep, that's it for the review. Again, if you want to check out my other reviews, there's a link below in the description, and please subscribe for more reviews, countdowns, and commentaries released every week. Have a good one out there.